Imagine, you are 52 years old. You have $3.75 in your wallet. And in your life, you have a husband who calls you a burden, grown children who despise you, and a mother-in-law whom you care for 24/7. Would you decide to change your life? My name is Cynthia Morris, and this is my story of hitting rock bottom. In this video, I share my step-by-step plan for revenge. Watch until the end and write in the comments whether I did the right thing with my husband and children. I counted the change in my worn wallet. Again, $3.75. The copper and nickel coins, cold to the touch, seemed to mock my once well-manicured fingers. These fingers had once held a brush, mixing ultramarine and ochre on a palette. They had been praised, photographed. Now, red and rough from constant disinfection, they counted pennies until the next payday. 3 more days until the end of the week. That wouldn't even be enough for good latex-free gloves for Martha, let alone milk and bread. The steady, soothing hum of the TV came from the living room. Mark was watching basketball. I knew every intonation of his commentary, every sigh of disappointment or approval. These sounds had been the soundtrack of my life for 30 years. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. The air in the kitchen was thick and heavy, smelling of stewed beef and cheap detergent. Asking him for money lately had become like defusing a bomb. I remembered other times. I remembered how he would hand me his credit card with a proud gleam in his eyes. "Spend it on something nice, Cindy. You deserve it." Back then my name sounded like a caress when he said it. Now every cent counted, every purchase was questioned with cold, accounting precision. Is this really necessary? Can you find it cheaper? You understand, Cindy. I'm the only one carrying this cross. I'm the only one doing the work. I walked to the doorway, unconsciously running my hand through my hair. Once thick and coppery, it was now dull, streaked with gray, and pulled back into a simple ponytail, practical, not pretty. "Mark? Can I have a minute?" He didn't look away from the screen, where muscular men in bright uniforms were chasing a ball.
"If it's just a minute."
I need money. At least $20. For your mother. She needs special gloves because of her allergies. And milk bread." He slowly, reluctantly turned his head. His gaze, heavy and tired, slid over my face, over the old housecoat I had bought many years ago at a nice department store, and I saw in his eyes not fatigue, but the familiar, soul-corroding contempt.
"Again. Cindy, I gave you some on Monday."
His voice was even indifferent. "That was Monday, Mark. Today is Thursday, and you gave me exactly what was on the list we made. But there were unexpected expenses."
"Unexpected? Your whole life is one big unexpected. Gloves, some drops, something else. Didn't you think that your unexpected expenses would fall on me? Everything is on me. Everything."
He got up from his chair. His shadow, once so reliable and beloved, cast by the light from the kitchen, crept over me and covered me completely. I felt small, pressed to the floor.
"Do you know who I saw at a business lunch today? Sarah Mitchell. Remember, you were in the same art department. All the critics praised her thesis. Now she's vice president at Gentech, overseeing the design department. She has a house in Preston Hollow. And you? In 30 years, you haven't even managed to make a career as a housewife. You're sitting here on my neck. Your whole life is eating my bread and pretending you're still the beauty from the cover of the student brochure."
His words burned more than I expected. They burned not only my skin, not only the present. They burned the bridge to my past, to that girl with an easel and bold plans. My throat tightened so much that I could hardly breathe. And then from the distant bedroom, came the hoarse, raucous cough of Martha, my husband's old and sick mother, a sound that had become the eternal soundtrack of my imprisonment. That sound gave me a ghostly drop of courage. "I gave my whole life to you." My voice trembled, but I didn't look away from his cold eyes. "Your sick mother who lives here with us. I wash her, feed her, change her diapers like a baby. Our children, who have already grown up and flown the nest I built for them. I gave my whole self, all my dreams, to this house. To you." I saw his face contort. It wasn't just anger. It was real primal rage. My attempt to defend myself, to remind him of his responsibilities, of his duty, was taken as unheard of insolence. As rebellion.
"You gave nothing. You sat at home like an expensive but useless ornament that faded and gathered dust over time. You are a burden. A freeloader. And the worst thing is that you don't even realize how useless you are.
And then it happened. His hand, broad with a familiar mole on the knuckle, which I once jokingly called my lucky star, shot up into the air and with all the force of years of accumulated contempt, came down on my cheek. A ringing sound. A deafening, piercing ringing in my ears, drowning out all the sounds of the world for a moment. And at first no pain. Just shock. Absolute, all-consuming, paralyzing shock. The world that consisted of this kitchen. The smell of stewed meat. The sounds behind the wall. It shattered into a billion pieces. I saw everything as if from the outside through cracked glass. The crumbs on the table, his face contorted with rage unfamiliar, my own trembling hand raised to my burning flushed cheek. In the dark screen of the turned-off TV, I saw my reflection, a woman with eyes wide open in horror, with a bruise already forming on her cheekbone. He didn't even stumble. He saw nothing in my eyes but his own reflection. He just exhaled and adjusted the perfectly ironed cuff of his $200 shirt.
Buy your own damn gloves. And don't let me hear about it again. Got it?
He turned with military precision and walked back into the living room, to his chair, to his life. A moment later, as if nothing had happened, the TV started playing again. The commentator was excitedly shouting about a successful shot. I stood there, unable to move, nailed to the floor by my own shame and humiliation. My cheek burned as if a red-hot iron had been pressed against it. But inside, deep down where colors and dreams once lived, everything had frozen. A void had formed filled with silence and ice. I looked at the doorway where my husband sat, the man who had just hit me. I heard the muffled cough of his mother, whom I had just humiliated myself in front of, begging for $20. I tasted the salty flavor of blood on my lip, which I had bitten when he hit me. And in that icy absolute silence, amid the ruins of my old world, a new thought was born. It did not come as a scream or a hysterical outburst. It arose from the very depths of the cooling void. Cold, hard, crystal clear like a diamond. He was wrong. He didn't break me. He broke the glass dome under which I had been smoldering all these years. He thought he was beating a helpless woman, but he just set free the person I had always been. It's over. I'm not your Cindy anymore. I'm Cynthia. And I'm mine. Only mine. The silence in the bedroom was deceptive. It was broken by two sounds. Mark's steady snoring and his mother's intermittent hoarse breathing from the next room. I lay on the edge of the bed, pressed against the cold wall. The blanket had slipped to the floor, but I didn't dare move. Each of Mark's breaths felt like a new humiliation on my swollen cheek. I carefully slid off the bed, like a criminal sneaking away from the scene of a crime. The kitchen smelled of yesterday's stew and despair. I didn't turn on the light. The moonlight cut through the darkness with a pale blade, revealing the outline of the kettle, the glint on the faucet, the shadow of my chair. I sat down, wrapping my arms around my shoulders, and stared into the black mirror of the window. There in the depths was reflected a pale woman with huge eyes. Was that me? And then the memory hit me like a knife to the ribs. I remembered. The bright light of the spotlights. I am standing at the blackboard in a new suit, bought with my first scholarship. My hands are trembling slightly, but my voice rings out clearly and confidently. Thus, the branding strategy must be based on an emotional response. In the hall are my teachers and classmates. I see their interested faces. In my jacket pocket is an invitation to an internship at Mason & Gray. The world smells of fresh printing ink, coffee, and endless possibilities. I am 25 and I know I will succeed. A cozy cafe a year later. Mark, still young with a charming smile, is holding my hand.
Quit that job, Cyn. Why do you need to work so hard? My salary is enough. Stay home and raise our children. I'll take care of everything.
His fingers gently caress my palm. His eyes are full of adoration. Sounded like care. Like love. Like a lucky ticket. Returning to the darkness of the kitchen, I clenched my hands so hard that my knuckles cracked. Provided. The word stuck in my throat like a bitter lump. Provided a mountain of dirty dishes that awaited me every morning. Provided with endless requests from his mother, whom he had moved in with us under the pretext of "you're at home anyway." Provided with school meetings he didn't attend and hospital visits with children he couldn't take. provided with the quiet erasure of my name from all documents. I became a ghost in my own home. Something clicked inside me. I got up and like a sleepwalker went into the bedroom. Mark was snoring sprawled out. I sank down in front of the old dresser that had once been mine. The bottom drawer creaked as it gave way. Under a stack of old newspapers and photographs of me laughing with the children in my arms, it lay there. A brown cardboard folder. I pulled it out with trembling hands. Dust swirled in the moonlight. Returning to the kitchen, I placed the relic on the table. The cardboard was faded and worn. I ran my finger over the embossing, which I remembered with my eyes closed. Aurora and CO. Brand strategies. Aurora is my middle name, which I have always loved. That very business plan. Buried under his mother's diapers and school textbooks. I didn't open the folder. I just sat there holding the fossilized promise I had made to myself. The Cindy who wasn't called a burden. The one who had a name. The house was silent, except for Mark's snoring and his mother's wheezing. But inside me a storm was brewing. I had no choice but to try to find a job. How long could I endure this financial dependence? Hope was faint. But was I faint? I really wanted to prove to myself that I was still capable of something. I stepped out of the elevator on the 7th floor of a glass office building. My palms were sweaty, leaving damp marks on my resume folder. 30 years ago, I would have walked in here with my head held high, feeling like I was in control. Now I felt like an old woman who had crashed someone else's party. The HR manager was young, very young. His name was Kyle, and his beard seemed older than he was. He leafed through my resume, and I saw his gaze linger on my graduation date.
Mrs. Morris, your education is impressive, but I have a question. What have you been doing for the last 28 years?
The air in the air-conditioned room suddenly became thick and heavy. I swallowed. I was a homemaker. I exhaled, feeling my face burn. Kyle nodded with a polite, perfunctory smile.
I see. But you see, we're looking for candidates with more relevant experience. Marketing has changed a lot in the last 5 years, let alone 28.
He said 28 with such ease, as if it were weeks, not years, that I had crossed out of my life. Years filled with mountains of children's laundry, sleepless nights at my sick mother-in-law's bedside, endless parent-teacher conferences. Years that had no value in this new fast-paced world. I'm a quick learner. I tried to argue, but my voice sounded weak and unconvincing.
I'm sure you are. We'll call you back.
We both knew that was a lie. Kyle was already closing my folder. A polite but ruthless gesture. In a week, I visited 12 companies. The answer was the same everywhere. I was 52 years old, and my professional experience was limited to managing a household on the budget Mark gave me each week. The last time I had earned my own salary, the bus fare was 60 cents. Despair began to creep up on me like a quiet, poisonous snake. My savings were melting away. The $300 I had saved over the years from my meager pocket money had turned into $210. Rent, utilities, loans, all of that was on Mark, but food, medicine for his mother, my personal expenses, all of that fell on me. And now, without a penny to my name, I was tied to him more than ever. And then I saw the ad. Cleaner needed in atelier. Cash payment. The Esther Atelier turned out to be a luxurious boutique in the city center. Crystal chandeliers, ivory-colored walls, mannequins and dresses that cost more than my first car. I was hired after a 5-minute conversation with the manager. Hourly wage. $10.50. No benefits, no sick leave. 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. That meant $315 a week. $1,260 a month. The numbers spun around in my head, ridiculous and humiliating. I used to earn twice as much as an intern. The first day was a test of endurance. My back burned from constantly bending over. My shoulders ached from the weight of the bucket of water. My knees, unaccustomed to the hard tile, began to ache after just an hour. I dusted expensive vases, washed the floors in the fitting rooms, where silk dresses lay scattered on the couches, and took out the trash, which smelled of expensive leather and even more expensive perfume. The seamstresses and saleswomen, all young, beautiful, and confident, floated around the hall, not noticing me. I was part of the interior like the mop in my hand. When I washed the floor in the workshop, they stepped over me, continuing to discuss the new collections animatedly. Their laughter was jarring to my ears. I watched their nimble fingers handling needles and expensive fabrics and felt a sharp, poisonous sting of envy. Not for their youth but for their opportunities. For their future which was wide open before them, like the doors of this atelier. At the end of the week I was handed an envelope. I went into the staff toilet, locked myself in a cubicle and opened it. $330. In cash. I sat on the closed toilet lid and counted the bills. 10, 20, 50. They smelled of chemicals and my sweat. It wasn't just money. It was my ticket to a different life. Small, pathetic, but mine. I pressed the bills to my chest and closed my eyes. Tears ran down my cheeks, but for the first time in many years, they weren't just tears of despair. It was nothing. And it was everything. It was the beginning. I adjusted the pillow under Martha's head, feeling my back ache. Her frail body seemed incredibly heavy after 8 hours with a mop in her hands.
Water,
She whispered, and I sighed and brought her a mug with a straw. Caring for an elderly person is not just about feeding and changing clothes. It's a never-ending cycle. Medication every 4 hours, changing her bedding at night when she was incontinent, constantly washing the floors after her clumsy attempts to get to the toilet, fighting her stubbornness and complaints. It's laundry at 2 in the morning. It's feeling guilty if you leave for 5 minutes. Mark, I said to my husband last week, let's look at a good nursing home for Mom. There's a vacancy at Sunset Hills. She'll be cared for by professionals. He looked at me with such indignation, as if I had suggested throwing her in the trash.
We don't put our relatives in nursing homes, Cindy. Are you having trouble coping? Is it really that hard to show a little concern?
Hard. It was like asking a drowning man if it was hard to swim with a rock around his neck. But I kept quiet. As always.
Cindy. Come here.
Mark's voice sounded like a gunshot. I flinched, almost dropping the bottle of medicine. I quickly fixed the blanket on Martha and went out into the hallway. Mark was standing in the middle of the living room, clutching my food delivery bill in his hand. His face was contorted with anger. He threw the paper at my feet.
Explain this to me. You've been ordering junk food for 3 days in a row. Have you gone completely lazy?
Mark, I get home from work at 7. My voice trembled. Your mother needs to be fed at 6. I physically don't have time to cook. He came so close that I could feel his breath on my face.
Don't you dare call mopping floors work. You're embarrassing me. My wife is a cleaner. Are you abandoning my mother for this pathetic money?
That pathetic money pays for her medicine. I blurted out. And for the food I order for her, because I don't have the strength to stand at the stove after my shift. But he wasn't listening anymore. His eyes were filled with hatred.
You've become a nobody, Cindy. A bad wife. A bad daughter-in-law. And if you think you can behave however you want.
He didn't finish, slamming the office door shut. I stood leaning against the wall trying to breathe. My ears were ringing. It felt like I was about to fall apart into tiny pieces. I was an empty shell that had just been stepped on. All that remained inside was pain and a hollow emptiness. And then I heard his voice from behind the door. Not angry, but gentle. He hadn't spoken to me like that in years. It was like being struck by lightning. I took a step toward the door, then another, holding my breath. His voice came through.
Don't worry, sunshine. Yes, we'll pick up your dress tomorrow. Don't worry about the price. No, she doesn't suspect anything. Stupid cow, always fussing over her old goat. Of course, I've already transferred $5,000 to your account. You deserve it, my dear.
My world turned upside down. 5,000. Dress. Stupid chicken. The words pierced my mind like red-hot needles. He wasn't just cheating on me. He despised me. He called his mother that, whom I cared for while he was having fun with some Amelia. The night was dark and starless. I lay next to Mark, listening to his steady breathing and couldn't close my eyes. My temples throbbed. 5,000. 5,000. Fear paralyzed me. What if he woke up? What if he caught me? But curiosity and a burning need to know the truth proved stronger. I carefully sat up, my heart pounding in my throat. His phone was on the bedside table. I reached out with a trembling hand. The PIN code. Our anniversary. A bitter smile stuck in my throat. He hadn't even bothered to change it. The screen lit up. I froze, afraid the light would wake him. But he just rolled over onto his other side. My fingers trembled as I opened the transaction history. And then I saw it. Not just suspicions but cold, ruthless numbers that painted a clear picture of betrayal. $5,000, transfer to Amelia Ross today. A $1,200, Cartier jewelry store earrings, a month ago. $850, Lou Bernardine restaurant, dinner for 2 weeks ago. $3,500, Bergdorf Goodman boutique, evening gown 3 weeks ago. $600, Penhaligon spa treatments for her 1 week ago. $450, the Plaza Hotel, room for 1 night, 4 days ago. I sat in the dark kitchen clutching my phone. My face was reflected in the black glass of the window, pale with a bruise under my eye. I couldn't remember when I had hit myself, my eyes hollow with grief and rage. A stranger. A woman who had been betrayed in the most despicable way. He spent more on his mistress than I earned in 3 months. He bought her diamonds and dresses from the boutiques where I washed the floors. He took her to restaurants we hadn't been to since our 10th anniversary. And at that moment something finally snapped. The pain receded, giving way to cold, steely rage. He thought he was playing a game of 2 families. But he was wrong. Now it was war. I was sitting in the kitchen, still clutching his phone in my hand, when I heard a faint but insistent sound. It wasn't a cry or a moan. It was a quiet voice, like the rustling of dry leaves.
Cindy. Baby?
It was Martha. She only called me baby, in those rare moments of clarity when her illness briefly let up. I put down the phone, that piece of plastic that held so many lies, and went to her room. She was lying in bed, looking so fragile in the light of the night lamp. Her eyes, usually cloudy, now looked at me with extraordinary intensity.
Sit down,
she whispered, nodding toward the edge of the bed. I obediently sat down, expecting another request for water or pills. But Martha slowly, with difficulty, stretched out her withered hand toward me.
I always saw it. I always saw how he treated you. I saw how you sacrificed yourself for him, for everyone.
I froze, unable to utter a word. She saw it? All these years. Her voice grew stronger, taking on a long-forgotten note of authority.
You're the only one who was there. Not my son. Not my grandchildren. Only you. You cared for me like family.
Silence reigned, broken only by the ticking of the clock in the hallway. But why now? I finally breathed. Why did you keep quiet all these years? Martha closed her eyes, and a tear rolled down her wrinkled cheek.
Pride. Shame. I raised such a man. I saw what he was doing and turned away. But now I can't. I don't want to leave knowing that everything I've achieved in life will go to him.
She paused, gathering her strength, then reached for the nightstand with a trembling hand. With a dull thud, she opened a secret compartment I hadn't suspected was there. From there, she took out a small but heavy metal box and an envelope made of thick paper.
Take it. These are my savings. What I've been putting aside my whole life ever since I was widowed. What he never found.
I reverently opened the box. Inside were neat stacks of $100 bills. Next to them were several savings books and a key to a safe deposit box at the bank.
There's $40,000 in cash here. And securities. And the key. Everything is in your name. I transferred it all a year ago when I realized the end was near.
I looked at her, this old, dying woman who, in the silence of her heart, had prepared the way to salvation for me. Tears streamed down my face, but this time they were not tears of pain, but of strange, bitter relief.
He mustn't get anything. Not a cent. He'll squander it all on those women. You deserve this. All my gratitude is here.
I sat there, holding more than just money and papers in my hands. I was holding justification, recognition, acts of forgiveness and justice, signed by fate itself in the form of this woman who was tired of life. Thank you, I whispered, kissing her cool hand. Thank you, Mom. For the first time in many years I called her Mom. And for the first time in many years that word didn't hurt my ears. It warmed me. It gave me strength. Now I had more than just a weapon. I had a rear guard. And that meant much more than all the money in the world. Rain pounded on the roof of the funeral home with monotonous indifference. I stood by the coffin, clutching a handkerchief in my hand, unable to hold back my tears. They flowed freely, hot and bitter. I wasn't just crying for Martha. I was crying for the injustice she had seen and tried to right in her final moments. I was crying with gratitude for her quiet, belated support, for the secret shield she had left me. In my black dress, bought with the very pitiful pennies I earned as a cleaning lady, I felt like her real daughter, the only one who mourned her, not her potential inheritance. Our children came to the funeral. Lisa flew in from abroad, Michael took time off from his startup. They were impeccable and cold like marble statues. Their hugs were brief and formal. They expressed their condolences to their father, barely looking at me. In the evening, we sat down to dinner in the very same dining room where Martha had once handed me her box. The air was thick and heavy, smelling of food and unspoken reproaches. Mark pushed his plate away and said,
"Calm down, Cindy. Stop playing the grieving widow. Everyone knows you've been waiting for this day to get rid of the burden."
I looked up at him, my eyes full of tears. I loved her, Mark. Unlike some people who only saw her as a problem. Mark snorted and glanced at the children.
"See? She started dividing things up right away. I told you what she was capable of."
Lisa gave me a cold look. Her gaze cut deeper than any knife.
"Mom, let's not get hysterical. We're all tired. You've always been a housekeeper in our house. Dad gave us everything: education, startup capital, connections. And you just served us. You cooked and cleaned."
The world shrank to the size of the dining table. I looked at my daughter's face and didn't recognize it. I gave you my life. I blurted out, my voice breaking into a whisper from the injustice. I sat with you at night when you were sick. I walked you to school. I listened to your first problems. I gave you my whole self. Michael, who had been silent until then, took an indifferent sip of wine.
"We don't need your life, Mom. We need money. Stability. Dad gives us that. What did you give us? Electricity bills and cutlets? Be grateful that Dad supported you all this time."
He stood up. The chair slid back with a crash. I looked at them, at my husband, whose face expressed satisfied anger, at my daughter, who looked at me with cold contempt, at my son, who stared boredly at his phone. Loneliness washed over me in such a wave that it took my breath away. It was thick, physical, like cotton wool clogging my lungs and throat. I was a ghost at this table. Invisible, whose 30 years of sacrifice were worth nothing. Without saying a word, I left the table. My footsteps echoed in the silence that reigned behind me. I climbed the stairs, went into my bedroom and closed the door. I stood in the middle of the room, the very room I had once lovingly furnished, and shook. But not from tears. From rage. Cold, pure, focused. They took everything from me. My husband, my children, my self-respect. They left me with only loneliness. And that was their mistake. Because in solitude there was no more fear. In solitude there was freedom. Freedom bought with $40,000 and a valuable document hidden at the bottom of a box. Freedom given to me by the one they all betrayed. I walked over to the window. The city shone below, indifferent to my pain. I placed my palms on the cold glass. Fine, I thought. You want money? You want war? You'll get it. The reflection in the glass was not that of a broken housewife. It was Aurora staring back at me, and there was fire in her eyes. I wanted to mourn Martha longer, but there was no time for that now. I knew I had to act. For my own sake. For the sake of Martha's memory. So I went to see a lawyer, overcoming my inner fear. The office door closed behind me with a quiet click, cutting me off from the outside world. The air smelled of expensive wood, leather and coffee. I sat in a deep leather chair across from the man on whom my future now depended. Adrian Rhodes. His name was on the list of the city's best family lawyers, and the initial consultation cost $500. I counted the bills from Martha's envelope that morning. My fingers didn't tremble. The lawyer's voice was calm, deep, the kind you wanted to believe.
"Mrs. Morris, tell me what brought you to me."
And I began to speak. No hysterics, no tears. I stated the facts like a report. the chronology of my imprisonment. I was married for 28 years. My voice sounded strange, steady. During that time, I had no access to the family accounts. My husband gave me a fixed amount of money for household expenses. My attempts to find a job were met with ridicule and sabotage. I told him about the slap, calling it an incident involving physical force. He nodded, taking notes. Recently, I discovered evidence of systematic infidelity. I opened my bag and took out the printed screenshots. The sheets lay on the polished table between us. Transfers totaling more than $11,000 over the last 3 months. Gifts, jewelry, expensive dinners. I placed a sheet with Mark's credit card statements in front of him. Cartier, $1,200. Bergdorf Goodman, $3,500. The Plaza Hotel. I spoke, but I could hear the numbers hanging in the air. Heavy and undeniable. Each one was evidence of his betrayal. Each one was a nail in the coffin of our marriage. Adrian Rhodes listened without interrupting. When I finished, he put down his pen.
Mrs. Morris. What you have described is a classic case of economic and psychological abuse in marriage. But you did not come to me as a victim. You came as a client with a very strong position.
He began to lay out my new reality. The law was a dry, precise machine, and he explained to me how to operate it.
Property acquired during the marriage is subject to division. In half. It doesn't matter that everything is in his name. This house, the cars, the investments, you are entitled to half.
I listened, my mouth going dry. Half. The word sounded like magic.
Given the length of the marriage and your position in the job market, you are fully entitled to alimony. Substantial alimony. Until you can support yourself at your previous level.
Alimony? I asked, my voice faltering for the first time. I, Cindy Morris, would receive alimony. From Mark.
And his retirement savings are also subject to division. And the evidence of squandering family funds on his mistress. This is not just proof of infidelity. It is a demonstration of irresponsible attitude towards the family budget, which will sway the judge in your favor when dividing assets.
I sat there, absorbing every word. Everything I considered my weakness, years of dependence, lack of a career, suddenly turned out to be my strength. The law protected me. Me. And then Adrian Rhodes looked me straight in the eye, putting all the papers aside.
Remember this once and for all, Mrs. Morris. You are not a victim. You have power. You just haven't used it. Now learn how.
The consultation came to an end. I left the office, holding a folder with documents and his business card in my hand. The door closed, but inside me something opened up. I stopped on the sidewalk and took a breath of the cool city air. It wasn't bitter. Tasted like freedom. In my coat pocket was an envelope, now considerably lighter, but it no longer seemed like savings to me, but rather startup capital. An investment in myself. I took out my phone. The same one from which, just a few days ago, I had downloaded the evidence of his betrayal and horror. Now I looked at it differently. It was a weapon, and I had just learned how to use it. I am not a victim. I have power. And I felt that power, cold and pure, filling me, driving out the last traces of fear. The war was just beginning. But now I had a general, a map, and an arsenal. I walked down the street, my gait firmer than ever. I closed the front door behind me, and the sound of the lock clicking sounded like a starting gun to me. I had returned to my home, but it was no longer my home. It was a battlefield. Voices came from the living room. Lisa, Michael, and Mark. They sat with glasses of wine, forming a perfect triangle of family unity in which I never had a place. The air smelled of expensive cheese and their shared contempt for me. I hung up my coat and walked into the living room, feeling the folder with the documents from the lawyer burning my hands through the leather of my bag. Mark looked up at me. His eyes, accustomed to seeking out my weaknesses, immediately caught something new. He didn't see the details, the new blanket, the different hairstyle. He sensed the very aura of change emanating from me and, like a predator, became alert. My husband's voice sounded like the sweet poison that had once paralyzed me.
So, the businesswoman is back. Where did you work today? Washing floors in another office? Or have you already worked your way up to the toilets?
He smirked, glancing at the children, seeking their approval. Lisa smiled demurely. Michael snorted, not looking up from his phone. They were waiting for my tears, my excuses, my humiliation. The usual ritual. I stopped in the middle of the room. Not at the edge as usual, but in the center. I felt the hard parquet under my feet and my own firm resolve. I know everything about Amelia Ross, Mark, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a blade. The smirk froze on his face. His eyes widened in confusion. Then panic flashed in them. I know about the $5,000 you transferred to her last week. I said it evenly, as if reading from an accounting report. I know about the Cartier earrings for $1,200. About the dress from Bergdorf Goodman for $3,500. About the dinner at Lou Bernardine for $850. And about the room at the plaza for $450. Each amount I named hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Mark's face turned white. He looked as if he had been hit on the head. Lisa slowly put her glass down on the table. The sound of crystal rang out deafeningly in the ensuing silence. Michael looked up at me for the first time all evening. There was no condescension in his eyes, only shock.
Were you following me?
No, I replied simply. I just stopped closing my eyes. I took a step forward. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I spoke to him the way he always spoke to me, from a position of strength. You can spend all the money you want on her. It's your choice. But know this. From today on, you no longer control a single cent of what I earn. And most importantly, I paused for a second, letting those words sink into the hearts of everyone in the room. You no longer control my life. Ever. The silence in the living room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I saw Lisa's lip tremble. Michael stopped fidgeting. They looked at me and didn't recognize me. They didn't see a mother, a servant, or a victim. They saw a stranger. Strong. Dangerous. And Mark just sat there and looked at me with animal fear. His weapons, ridicule, manipulation, humiliation, shattered against my calmness. He lost this round. And he knew it. I turned and walked away. I didn't need to look at them. I didn't need to see their shock. I left them there, in their living room, with their shattered myth about themselves and about me. The door to my bedroom closed silently behind me. But for them, I knew that sound was louder than any bang. I touched the folder with the documents. The war was just beginning. But the first, most important battle, the battle for self-respect, had been won. The oak paneling of the courtroom absorbed every sound, creating an oppressive, almost church-like silence. I sat next to Adrian Rhodes, my hands resting on my knees to hide their slight trembling. Not from fear. From anticipation. Across the aisle sat Mark. His expensive suit and neatly combed hair couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders. Next to him were Lisa and Michael. My children. They looked at me not as their mother, but as their accuser. Their eyes showed confidence. Dad will decide everything, Dad will fix everything. They still believed in his myth.
The court has reached a decision.
The judge's voice rang out clearly, cutting through the silence. Adrian had done a flawless job. Like a surgeon, he had dissected our family life, showing the court not a marriage but a system of oppression.
Irrefutable evidence of systematic embezzlement of joint funds by the defendant has been presented.
His words hung in the air. He read out the figures I had once scraped from my husband's phone. $5,000. Bergdorf Goodman. Each amount was a nail in the coffin of his reputation. I saw Mark clench his fists. He tried to parry, talking about gratitude and earned rights. But his words were shattered against the cold wall of facts. And then the moment came. The judge read the verdict. His voice was an indifferent mechanism dispensing justice.
The claims are partially satisfied. The property acquired during the marriage is subject to division in equal shares. The defendant is ordered to pay alimony in the amount of $4,000 per month until the plaintiff achieves financial independence. All court costs are to be borne by the defendant.
The numbers were spoken and hung in the air. Half. $4,000 a month. For me, these were not just numbers. It was the price of my freedom. The official legal value of 30 years of my life, my sacrifice, my labor. The law, cold and impartial, recognized what Mark and the children refused to see. I had a right. To money. To respect. To life. We stepped out into the hallway. The cool air smelled of dust and formality. And then something snapped in Mark. The rage from losing money, from public humiliation, from the destruction of his image, it all spilled out. But not at me. He turned to his children.
You.
His voice was hoarse, full of hatred. He pointed his finger at Lisa, then at Michael.
You sat there like idiots. Not a word in my defense. You didn't help at all. I put you on your feet, did everything for you, and you just watched.
He was pathetic. His face was contorted, saliva flying as he shouted. He shook with impotent rage, lashing out at those he considered his property. Lisa and Michael froze. They stared at him with wide eyes. There was no longer adoration or indulgence in their gaze. There was shock, disgust, fear. For the first time in their lives, they saw not an almighty breadwinner, but a weak, embittered man who had lost the battle and was lashing out at his own. I stood there for a second watching the scene. I felt no joy, only bitter, cold satisfaction. The truth that I had carried inside me for so long had burst free and shattered their imaginary world. They finally saw him for who he really was. Without saying a word, I turned and walked down the hallway toward the exit. My footsteps echoed on the stone floor. I didn't look back. Behind me lay the ruins of my old life. Ahead lay freedom. Won. Earned. Legitimate. I stepped outside and the sunlight hit my face. I squinted, breathing in air that no longer smelled of lies and betrayal. The war was over. It was time to live. 2 years. 2 years separated the woman with $3 in her worn wallet from the woman whose office bore a sign reading Cynthia Morris, founder and president of the Aurora Foundation. The office was on the 20th floor of a business center, with a panoramic view of the city. Minimalism, light oak, a leather armchair. On the table, under glass, lay that very brown wallet, and next to it in a frame was the Businesswoman of the Year award. The irony of fate can sometimes be exquisite. Adrian Rhodes, my former lawyer and now the foundation's legal director, leaned back in his chair opposite me. He said, leafing through the report.
Case 127 was closed yesterday. Mrs. Peterson got custody of the children, half the property, and alimony. Her husband, like Mark, was convinced that the kitchen was her lifelong privilege.
Mark's name no longer caused me pain. Only a slight, almost scientific curiosity, like an archaeologist studying a fossil. Great, I nodded. Give her our standard support package. Retraining courses, 3 months' rent, and sessions with a psychologist. The office door opened slightly, and my assistant ushered in a young woman. Anna, 32 years old, 2 children, a financier husband who controlled every penny. I saw myself in her, as if in a crooked mirror, smaller and therefore even more fragile. Her fingers nervously fiddled with the handle of a cheap handbag. She whispered, sitting down on the edge of a chair.
Mrs. Morris, I don't know where to start. He checks my receipts. He says I'm worthless.
I used to count change in the kitchen at night too, I interrupted her gently. My voice was calm. It wasn't shaking anymore. I know what it feels like to be humiliated when you ask for money for sanitary pads. I remember what it's like to be invisible in your own home. Her eyes filled with tears of relief. Someone understood. Someone had been there. But now you're not alone, I said, handing her the folder with the action plan. You have me. And you have Aurora. That evening, while sorting through my mail, I came across a letter with a familiar address. It was from Mark. The subject line read, "Congratulations." I opened it without any emotion other than mild curiosity.
Cindy. You've done me in. Your foundation, those articles, your charity galas. Amelia ran away a month ago. Turns out she was only interested in money. She cleared out the account that was left after the trial. The kids. Lisa and Michael aren't answering their phones. Michael said I'm toxic. I'm sitting in an empty apartment, I'm renting, our house is sold, looking at your photos in magazines. Stop the fund. Enough. At least you take pity on me. M.
Attached to the letter was a bank statement. Balance: $83.17. Numbers: Always numbers. Once upon a time, his accounts were overflowing with zeros, and my wallet was empty. Now our roles have reversed with mathematical precision. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the city at night. The lights flashed like neurons in a giant's brain. Somewhere out there was Anna, who had just taken her first step toward freedom. Somewhere was Mrs. Peterson, who was sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. He asked me to feel sorry for him, but I remembered that woman. The one who washed floors at Esther's atelier, while he bought diamonds for Amelia. The one whose children called her the maid. The one whose soul had been methodically ground into dust for 30 years. And I remembered Martha. Her cool hand in mine, her whisper in the night. "You're the only one who was there for me." Her $40,000 and the key to the safe, which became not just money, but the first act of faith in me. She was the only one who saw the person behind the shadow of his wife. And now every success of the foundation was part of her legacy, the legacy of a woman who, in the face of death, decided to restore justice. I looked at the screen. Next to Mark's letter was a new letter. From Lisa. Subject: "Hi Mom." I didn't open it. Not now. I picked up the printout. Anna's first statement of independent income. She had gotten a job as a graphic designer. Salary $3,200 a month. For her, it was a whole universe. "No, Mark," I thought, looking at his pitiful figure of $83. "I won't stop. I can't. Too many unhappy women have entrusted me with their hopes." I sent his letter to the archive folder and closed it. Pain should not be buried in the sand. It needs to be turned into a shield, into a ladder, into a bridge for those who follow. My legacy was not in the money in my accounts. It was in the 127 Annas who were no longer afraid of tomorrow. It was in the wisdom of Martha, who forged the key to my freedom from the crucible of her own suffering. And in one Cindy who finally found not just freedom. She found meaning. I turned off the light in my office. The city shone below. And somewhere in its lights, a new hope was already glowing. The very hope that once, in the pitch darkness, one old woman had lit for another.
Thank you for watching until the end. For me, this story is not just a plot. It is a reminder that even in the darkest situations, you can find light. Let's support each other. Subscribe, there are many important topics ahead. Write in the comments which phrase from the story touched you the most. Share your experience. How did you find the strength to get back up? Your comments are a living chronicle of our victories. Thank you for allowing me to be your guide in the world of life-changing stories. See you soon.